Cecilia, go ahead.
Yes, our presentation, we are two presenters today, Beatriz Pont from the OECD and me, Cecilia Azorín. So she's going to start.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. I'm now sharing our screen. Can you see it? Hello?
We can see it, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so it's a pleasure for Cecilia and I to be with you today. We've been working and collaborating together in this virtual environment to prepare this presentation about policy approaches to support collaborative networking in education. And the aim is to give you an international perspective of the different policies that have been in place. And the focus of the presentation is, we're going to look at what is collaborative networking as an approach to school improvement. Then we analyze the collaborative networking approach by looking at different international practices to understand what are the policy approaches that are being used, and we end with some lessons for the future. And this is done following a review of the literature to understand whether they have increased policy relevance. And to begin with, we see that we are in an increasingly interconnected world, and networks of practitioners and policymakers and others in education are really increasing, as is the case, for example, today. But this is really the case with our globalized world and with the use of technologies, and also in person. People want to connect, and this is a reality. And the way we see collaborative networking is among professionals who are involved in education, and this can be leaders, educators, scholars, policymakers, and others. And they are often, and what we've seen is focused on school improvement and equity, and at the heart is professional learning and innovation. And this form of understanding networking includes crossing boundaries and building bridges within, between, and beyond schools. And this is ways that we're looking towards improving education systems internationally. So what we see in terms of the data, we see that teacher collaboration is actually on the rise. And here we have some data from Thales that shows that teachers are increasingly collaborating with colleagues. You see in the bottom, in the top, professional collaboration. Teachers are collaborating at least once a month, teaching jointly, and we count this as collaboration, but also participating in collaborative professional learning at less than once a month. But most of them, more than 80% are saying they are doing this across the board in participating countries in Thales. And they also point that they're engaging in joint activities across different classes and age groups, and a less high proportion observing other teachers' classes and providing feedback. There's also collaboration in terms of teaching, engaging in discussions, exchanging teaching materials. So this is more at the school level, but the professional collaboration that we're talking about as well beyond the school borders are prevalent in teachers' practices internationally. We also see that this has increased. Here again, this is the figure that shows Thales data. So the practices of teachers teaching jointly as a team, for example, have increased in many countries. You see in 2018, it has increased in a large number of the countries that have participated in Thales. And in Thales shows that teachers who report engaging in professional collaboration with their peers most often tend to report higher levels of job satisfaction. And they also tend to report higher levels of self-efficacy. Now, that is not a measure of impact, but they are showing, because it's very difficult to demonstrate this link between student learning, and the way that Thales thinks about this is looking at self-efficacy, but it does show that both in terms of job satisfaction and self-efficacy, teachers value collaboration greatly. So this is now the present, and it's going to be the future. Leaders as well show that they are increasingly using collaborative practices, and this has always been a key role of leaders, to engage with parents and with others beyond the school borders, but they also point at almost 40% of principals in Thales point that they're collaborating with principals from other schools on challenging work tasks. So this also shows that these practices are going on. And as well, research shows that school leadership actions, what school leaders decide to do, are strong predictors of collaborative actions between teachers as well. So school leaders can foster greater collaboration of themselves and their teacher workforce in the schools beyond the school borders. So it's, and at the system level as well, and here's a figure from a survey that was done between the OECD and Harvard on COVID, and at the first wave, how did people engage in setting the new strategies? And actually, most people highlighted that the strategies were designed in a collaborative manner, including teachers. So collaboration is already happening as well. And COVID has been a bit of a trigger for this, that to experience much more collaboration and much more productive and meaningful collaboration to find solutions for a problem that we've all faced. So we see, that collaboration is increasing and networks are increasing. And Cecilia will continue with our presentation and we'll end with some conclusions.
Thank you, Beatriz. And we want to highlight the growing of networks in a wide range of school settings in recent years. And from the point of view of sustainability, it has been stated that networking is more effective when bottom-up rather than top-down interventions. So there are few comparative studies of networking experience which make this work valuable for educators, researchers, policymakers, and of course Icsei members. And it is important for us to clarify that little attention has been paid to the analysis of the leadership models, policies, approaches, and theories that support these initiatives. Next, please. Collaborative networks, in essence, are seen as drivers of educational improvement strategies, and the European Commission conclude that there are currently two networking approaches. We can speak about policy directives or programs to take educational underperformance via peer learning between schools, and ensuring that high-performing schools have a clear mandate to transfer their skills and expertise within the system. And this approach is based on the top-down model of intervention. And the other is the facilitative enabling, which provide arm's length support to school networks that have developed organically, such as through the provision of infrastructure to support collaboration. And this approach is linked to the bottom-up strategies. So there is a wide range of countries that today represent these approaches, and the international literature abounds with examples where education reforms are being implemented to encourage a culture of cooperation and networking. And below is presented a bird's eye view of collaborative networks, in which it is interesting to see how very different educational contexts are adopting a facilitative or a directive approach. And in this slide, we have the enabled facilitative approach, which provides the power, resources, and opportunity to make networking happen in a more fluid and flexible way. And this first approach is related to networking experiences that are emerging organically at the time that are based on a facilitative strategy. And so some of the countries that are exploring this approach are Spain and Mexico. And in this particular context, there are examples that reveal how organic networking has grown and is being increasingly recognized at the policy level. So the Spanish education system, for example, has been influenced by the international context and has multiplied its collaborative networking practices. in this particular country, alliance has been formed to implement networked actions within, between, and beyond schools as part of research supported by projects, regulations, programs, and initiatives of diverse nature. So working in education networks in Spain is something related to the promotion of and the creation of an inter-school organizational structure, which is based on responsibility sharing, collaborative learning, consensus building between schools, and increase in a work philosophy based on equity, learning for all, and school improvement. And in the case of Mexico, there is also research evidence focusing on, for example, virtual collaborative network has an innovative and effective educational practice supported by technology. There are also experience in higher education that use networking as a vehicle for improvement and interinstitutional collaboration. And also we can see networking projects for research and for the exchange of teaching proposals that can construct and share knowledge related to educational intervention in classrooms. So recently, authors such as Peña Ayala and Rincón Gallardo are aware that networking is considered as a new paradigm based on educational change in this particular country. And if we look at through the lens of the directive approach conducted by policy, this is conducted by policy mandates and are focusing at the system level and generated by an interventionist strategy. And several countries, such as, for example, the United Kingdom and Chile, shows how policies are directly promoting networking across schools to support overall educational progress. So these countries are providing different pathways for networking through governance in action. And in the different countries of the UK, support between schools is growing and networks are constantly being formed. This association and alliance are banking on network collaboration to share experience, generate knowledge, and respond better to student diversity, among other aims. And across the UK, there are policies that encourage networking, and there is a growing emphasis on schools and professionals working together in partnerships and networks to support the improvement efforts. And finally, the education system of Chile joining the international trend too by developing a set of ambitious reforms. And in the past 5 years, they are prompting a move towards a collaborative educational culture among schools. And today, Chile, the Chilean government is improving the educational system through networking, using support and collaboration between schools. So Chile is fostering systemic change in challenging circumstances where a strategy based on school improvement and collaborative inquiry is being developed and very well documented. So Beatriz is now going to conclude our presentation with some reflections related to this.
Thank you, Cecilia. So for us, we've looked at the overall, in general, the literature and the research that is currently being undertaken in education, focused on collaborative networks as a driving force behind education strategies. And we see that there's increasing evidence on the role of these networks in education as an approach to extending system capacity to respond to education challenges. We also see that whether facilitative or directive approaches, this is spreading internationally. And we also think that, you know, how can these be encouraged further? It's still, we think that Cecilia and I have been discussing and preparing for this, and we see that it's still, indeed, as Chris was saying, it's unclear about the impact. And but there is increasing evidence on the positive impact in general of teacher collaboration and the power of networks. And some of the increases may be due to changes in governance, complexity, and changes in the way that education policy making and implementation is happening, which is engaging stakeholders much more directly in shaping policy. And so this is at the heart. It's professionals shaping their own practice through networks and through improving their own capacity and extending their capacity by networking and engaging in collaboration with others. We also think it's a trend that aligns to the increase in professionalism of the education workforce that, you know, is revealed by the collaborative professionalism of Hargraves et al. And others. And this also shows that professionals are taking their work in their own hands, whether, and sometimes governments in the more facilitative approach, they set up the incentives for this collaboration to happen. And that's when it can work well as well. And the factors that maybe make them work are, you know, policies can help trigger them with incentives by giving time. But it's quite important that there is a purpose to these collaborative networks. And otherwise, it's very easy that they don't have, you know, as much impact as they would otherwise want to have if the focus is not well clarified from the beginning. And that contextual factors are very important. So the whether a government is very centralized or decentralized, how much space there is for innovation, how much leadership is allowing for these networks to happen, the time available for education professionals to engage in this collaborative networking, and the resources to be able to do this, whether there's technology, whether there's, you know, spaces to meet physically, whether there's resources available to be able to do this is at the heart. So we stop here and we ask you, how do you think these could be encouraged further, or do they need to be encouraged further through policy?
Thank you, Beatriz and Cecilia. Are there any questions or comments? I see one hand raised. Salman, go ahead. We have only 3 minutes for questions. You're on mute, Salman.
Sorry. I have just some thoughts in my mind while I was listening to Chris and now to this to Cecilia and Pont. What about university-based professional development programs? What do you see the role of university-based programs that prepare school leaders and teachers? So, as you know, there is now an increasing focus internationally on professional network collaboration between school leaders, schools, and teachers. So now maybe university-based and academic programs that are tended to improve the performance of school leaders and teachers will find themselves not very relevant, not very responsive and agile compared to professional learning networks. So how can universities or university-based professional development programs respond to such rapid increase of the importance of network collaboration?
Thank you, Salman, for this very pertinent question. I've been working actually with Norway, who defined this new model for school improvement that is based on providing incentives for universities and schools to collaborate together to define the professional learning that's most suitable for schools. And actually working with them, what happened or what we saw was that universities, you know, they deliver what they consider is the most needed for schools, and schools may not think that universities are delivering something that's relevant to them. And therefore, and the matching of the need between schools and universities is very, very important. And the incentives for universities to change their practice in terms of continuous professional development or learning needs to exist. I think that the Norwegian model, it's called the DECOMP model, is trying to do this by giving money, but indirectly to universities, only when there's been agreement of what needs to be delivered. And the universities are starting to send their professors and their researchers to the classroom to try to match much better what they need to deliver for schools to really focus, for schools or networks of schools or others that are working, you know, to define their own needs. It's a very interesting program, and it's taking a long time to develop, but that's the aim, because there is quite a gap, I think, sometimes between what universities are delivering in the space of their own classrooms and what schools really need on the ground. So it is important, I think, to close that gap.
Thank you very much
Thank you
for
so
your
much.
presentation, Beatriz and Cecilia, and answering this question. There's so much more to say about it, but we have to move to the next presentation. Perhaps we'll have some more time in the end. So can I invite Maria to give her presentation, please?
Thank you very much.